Mother by Emily Carr. To show Mother, I must picture Father, because Mother was Father's reflection, smooth, liquid reflecting of definite steel-cold reality. Our childhood was ruled by Father's unbendable iron will, the obeying of which would have been intolerable but for Mother's patient polishing of its dull metal so that it shone and reflected the beauty of orderliness that was in all Father's ways, a beauty you had to admire, for in spite of Father's severity and his overbearing omnipotence, you had to admit the justice even in his dictatorial bluster. But somehow Mother's reflecting was stronger than Father's reality, for after her death it lived on in our memories and strengthened, while Father's tyrannical reality shriveled up and was submerged under our own development. Father looked taller than he really was, because he was so straight. Mother was small-made and frail. Our oldest sister was like Father. She helped Mother raise us and finished our upbringing when Mother died. I was 12 when Mother died. The raw, green Victoria age, 12 years old. The routine of our childhood home ran with mechanical precision. Father was ultra-English, a straight, stern autocrat. No one ever dreamt of crossing his will. Mother loved him and obeyed him because it was her loyal pleasure to do so. We children had to obey from both fear and reverence. Nurse Randall has told me of my first birthday. I was born during a mid-December snowstorm. The north wind howled and bit. Contrary from the start, I kept the family in suspense all day. A row of sparrows, puffed with cold, sat on the rail of the balcony outside Mother's window, bracing themselves against the danger of being blown into the drifted snow piled against the window. Icicles hung, wind moaned. I dallied. At 3 in the morning, I sent Father plowing on foot through knee-deep snow to fetch Nurse Randall. I never did feel that it was necessary to apologize to my father for being late. It made variety for him, seeing that he always got his way in everything. When Father commanded, everybody ran. Every evening at 5:45, Mother would say, "Children, is every gate properly shut and fastened? Are no toys littering the garden? No dolls sitting on human chairs? Wash your faces then, and put on clean pinafores. Your father will soon be home." If visiting children happened to be playing with us in our garden, or a neighbor calling on Mother, they scurried for the gate as fast as they could. Father would not have said anything if he had found them in his house. That was just it. He would not have said anything to them at all. He would have stalked in our front door, rushed through the house, and out of the side door, frowning terribly, hurrying to tend Isabella, the great purple-fruited grapevine that crawled half over our house and entirely over Father's heart. Her grapes were most beautifully fogged with dusky bloom, behind which she pretended her fruit was luscious. But they really were tough-skinned, sour old grapes. Father was burstingly proud of miserable old Isabella. He glassed her top so that her upstairs grapes ripened a whole month earlier than her downstairs ones. He tacked Isabella up, he pinched her back, petted, trained her, gave her everything a vine could possibly want, endured far more waywardness from her than all of us together would dare to show. After Father had fussed over Isabella and eaten a good dinner, he went upstairs to see Mother, who was far more often in bed, ill, than up. He was good to Mother in his own way, gave her every possible comfort, good help, good doctoring, best food, but I resented that he went to Isabella first and Mother after. He was grumpy, too, when he did go. He sat beside her bed for half an hour in almost complete silence. Then he went downstairs to read his paper till bedtime. I heard a lady say to Mother, "Isn't it difficult, Mrs. Carr, to discipline our babies when their fathers spoil them so?" Mother replied, "My husband takes no notice of mine till they're old enough to run round after him. He then recognizes them as human beings, and as his children accepts their adoration. You know how little tots worship big, strong men." The other mother nodded, and my mother continued, "Each of my children in turn, my husband makes his special favorite. When they come to this man-adoring age, when this child shows signs of having a will of its own, he returns it to the nursery and raises the next youngest to favor. This one," she put her hand on me, "has overdrawn her share of favoritism because there is no little sister to step into her shoes. Our small son is much younger and very delicate. His father accuses me of coddling him, but he's the only boy I have left. I lost 3. Father kept sturdy me as his pet for a long time. 'Ah,' he would say, 'this one should have been a boy.' The very frailness of her little son made Mother love him harder. She did not mind the anxiety and trouble if only he lived. Father insisted that I be at his heels every moment that he was home. I helped him in the garden, popping the bulbs into holes that he dug, holding the strips of cloth and the tacks while he trained Isabella. I walked nearly all the way to town with him every morning. He let me snuggle under his arm and sleep during the long Presbyterian sermons. I held his hand during the walk to and from church. This all seemed to me fine until I began to think for myself, and then I saw that I was being used as a soother for Father's tantrums. Like a bone to a dog, I was being flung to quiet Father's temper. When he was extra cranky, I was taken into town by my big sister and left at Father's wholesale warehouse to walk home with him because my chatter soothed him. I resented this and began to question why Father should act as if he was God. Why should people dance after him and let him think he was? I decided disciplining would be good for Father, and I made up my mind to cross his will sometimes. At first he laughed, trying to coax the waywardness out of me. But when he saw I was serious, his fury rose against me. He turned and was harder on me than any of the others. His soul was so bitter that he was even sometimes cruel to me. "Mother," I begged, "need I be sent to town any more to walk home with Father?" Mother looked at me hard. "Child," she cried, "what ails you? You've always loved to be with your father. He adores you. What is the matter?" "He's cross. He thinks he's as important as God." "Mother, was supremely shocked. She had brought her family up under the English tradition that the men of a woman's family were created to be worshipped. My insurrection pained her. She was as troubled as a hen that has hatched a duck. She wanted to question me, but her loyalty to father forbade. She said to me, "Shall you and I have a picnic?" She knew that above all things I loved a picnic. "All to ourselves?" I asked. "Just you and I." It was the most wonderful thing she could have suggested. I was so proud. Mother, who always shared herself equally among us, was going to give me a whole afternoon of herself. It was wild lily time. We went through our garden, our cow yard and pasture, and came to our wild lily field. Here we stood a little, quietly looking. Millions upon millions of white lilies were spangled over the green field. Every lily's brown eye looked down into the earth, but her petals rolled back over her head and pointed to the pine tree tops and to the sky. No one could make words to tell how fresh and sweet they smelled. The perfume was delicate, yet had such a power. Its memory clung through the rest of your life and could carry you back any time to that old lily field, even after the field had become city and there were no more lilies in it, just houses and houses. Yes, even then your nose could ride on the smell and come galloping back to the lily field. Between our lily field and Beacon Hill Park there was nothing but a black turred fence. From the bag that carried Mother's sewing and our picnic, she took a big key and fitted it into the padlock. The binding chain fell away from the pickets. I stepped with Mother beyond the confines of our very fenced childhood. Pickets and snake fences had always separated us from the tremendous world. Beacon Hill Park was just as it had always been from the beginning of time, not cleared, not trimmed. Mother and I squeezed through a crack in its greenery. Bushes whacked against our push. Soon we came to a tiny grassy opening filled with sunshine, and we sat down under a mock orange bush, white with blossom and deliciously sweet. I made a daisy chain and Mother sewed. All round the opening crowded spirea bushes loaded with droops of creamy blossom having hot fluffy smell. In these bees droned and butterflies fluttered, but our mock orange bush was whiter and smelled stronger and sweeter. We talked very little as we sat there. Mother was always a quiet woman, a little shy of her own children. I am glad she was not chatty, glad she did not perpetually "dear" us as so many English mothers that we knew did with their children. If she had been noisier or quieter, more demonstrative or less loving, she would not have been just right. She was a small, gray-eyed, dark-haired woman, had pink cheeks, and struggled breathing. I do not remember to have ever heard her laugh out loud, yet she was always happy and contented. I was surprised once to hear her tell the bishop, "My heart is always singing." How did hearts sing? I'd never heard Mother's. I had just heard her difficult, gasping little breaths. Mother, her moving was slow and weak, yet I always think of her as having Jenny Wren Bird's quickness. I felt instinctively that was her nature. I became aware of this along with many other things about my mother, things that unfolded to me in my own development. Our picnic day was perfect. I was for once Mother's oldest, youngest, her companion child, while her small neat hands hurried the little stitches down the long white seams of her sewing, and my daisy chains grew and grew, while the flowers of the bushes smelled, and sunshine and silence were spread all round. It almost seemed rude to crunch the sweet biscuit which was our picnic. Ordinary munching of biscuits did not seem right for such a splendid time. When I had 3 daisy chains round my neck, when all Mother's seams were stitched, and when the glint of sunshine had gone quiet, then we went again through our gate, locked the world out, and went back to the others. It was only a short while after our picnic that Mother died. Her death broke Father. We saw then how he had loved her, how alone he was without her. None of us could make up to him for her loss. He retired from business. His office, desk, and chair were brought home and put into the room below Mother's bedroom. Here Father sat, staring over his garden. His stare was as empty as a pulpit without a preacher, and with no congregation in front of it. We saw him there when we came from school, and we went stupidly wandering over the house from room to room, instead of rushing straight up to Mother's bedroom. By and by, when we couldn't bear it any longer, we'd creep up the stairs, turn the door handle, go into emptiness, get caught there and scolded for having red eyes and no bravery. I was often troublesome in those miserable days after Mother died. I provoked my big sister, and when her patience was at an end, she would say, trying to shame me, "Poor Mother worried about leaving you. She was happy about her other children, knowing she could trust them to behave. Good, reasonable children. You are different." Oh, this cut me to the quick. For years I had spells of crying about it. Then, by and by, I had a sweetheart. He wanted me to love him, and I couldn't. But one day I almost did. He found me crying and coaxed, "Tell me." I told him what my big sister had said. He came close and whispered in my ear, "Don't cry, little girl. If you were the naughtiest, you can bet your mother loved you a tiny bit the best. That's the way mothers are."